These Wednesday panels are big ones. This is the plugged-in series where we have a procured group of subject matter experts to talk about a particular topic. Stephen will introduce the topic and the panelists, but just wanted to draw your attention to the scroll that was just on the screen to thank our sponsors. Without them, this wouldn't happen. And just to go over a little bit of housekeeping, the way we like to structure these events typically are more along the lines of somewhat like an earnings call. So we like the subject matter experts to have 30, 40 minutes of time to chat. We do ask that if you have questions as the chat goes along to use the chat feature in the box. Stephen and myself will harvest these questions and keep them in an offline document to organize them and somewhat group them. And then after the 30, 40 minutes or so, we'll open it up. We'll ask you to turn your mics and your cameras back on so we can call out on you and get you interactive. But during the time of the presentation, for bandwidth purposes and just for purposes of keeping your focus, we ask that you turn off your cameras and your microphones for that time being. So again, I'd like to introduce Stephen Coltar, who chairs our Strategy and Portfolio Planning Committee, by far the most active committee in terms of putting on content so far in the shutdown. This is one series which has somewhat of a follow-up, and we have more to follow during the summer. So Stephen, I'll hand it up to you to introduce the topic and the panelists.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tommy. So yeah, just to reiterate, if you can switch off your audio and video for now, just so you don't appear to be one of the panelists, but please, I encourage you strongly to use the chat feature. We normally have a very good conversation ongoing, and it does feed into the second half of the call. So today's plugged-in session is titled The Data-Driven Case for Working Face-to-Face. Now, this originated from Greg, our moderator, reaching out to one of our committee members, Bill Mooney, but it has been tailored to help us all better understand and work through the consequences of having a large workforce work from home. As advertised, the cracks are starting to appear. Different organizations are piloting different approaches, and everyone is trying to figure out how to turn the blended work to their advantage. Our panelists today are Andy Moda, who is a New York Director of Workplace Interiors and Change Management at Jacobs, Ben Weber, who is President and co-founder of Humanize, a workplace analytics company, Melissa Marsh, who is founder of PlastArc, a social science-based workplace consultancy. She's also a senior managing director of occupant experience at Savills. And Greg Lindsay, our moderator, a journalist, urbanist, futurist, and speaker. He is director of applied research at New Cities and co-author of Aerotropolis, The Way We'll Live Next. And with that, I'll hand over to Greg. Enjoy the panel.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Yes, it's always great when someone mentions your book about cities, globalization, and air travel in the middle of a global pandemic that has destroyed all three, or perhaps not, we will see. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for joining. I'm really excited to have this group of panelists here. I've had so much fun chatting with Ben and Melissa, our old friends, and Ben and I have written papers for Harvard Business Review together. Andy's a more recent acquaintance, but I think this is going to be a great discussion because, to invoke, I believe we attribute this quote to Mike Bloomberg's staff when he was mayor, in God we trust, but all others bring data. So I think we're going to have a very data-heavy informed debate here about, sort of where the work from home, work remote, cloud commute patterns of hybrid work are going, and exactly why it's really in no one's interest. I think we'll arrive at this at least as a point that that pure atomized remote work forever is going to be a bad thing. And in fact, as you highlighted, the cracks are starting to show. We're going to see this. So let's get started here. I think it's already been discussed here. We'll do about 30 minutes here of internal discussion among the four of us, and then we'll turn it over to you and your questions, which we'll diligently collect and go from there. And I guess I'd like to start the discussion with Ben here, who, if you guys are diligent readers of the New York Times Magazine, you saw Ben was quoted recently by Clive Thompson in a piece of What If Work From Home Continues Forever? And Ben made some excellent points based on the data that Humanize collects through its sensors, and in this case, more communication patterns, that we're seeing atrophy inside organizations that is helping them maintain short-term productivity, but is already leading them to basically start to suffer the muscle atrophy that will help them innovate and proceed after the pandemic. So Ben, I guess as a way of priming, if you could talk a bit about what you're seeing from your clients about, how are organizations changing and not all for the better during the pandemic?
Yeah, and I think that what we've seen from the data we've collected, and just to be clear, this is stuff like email, chat, meeting data, really not looking at content, but looking at communication between people. Obviously, in the past, we looked at a lot of sensor data as well in terms of in-person interaction. There's just a lot less of that, except maybe in some of our Korean customers. If folks hear me okay, by the way, I'm getting weird messages from Zoom. It's okay?
Yeah, you're a little staticky here. I don't know. You're a little in there. I don't know if you can turn off some bandwidth.
Yeah, well, so maybe if you want, so I can come back if it's okay for now. I'll try to call him from my phone. All right, so we'll assume this is good. So as we can already see, a great illustration, maybe some of the issues, but generally what we're seeing is, again, people are really emphasizing their strong relationships and strong interactions, right? So people that you meet with on average an hour or more, one-on-one a week, that communication is increasing over time, right? And so you've looked at that, really in the, especially for the first few weeks that people start to work from home, that increased. Yep. Can't hear me very well?
Yeah, stop there for a second. Try one more time, and if not, we'll have you dial back.
If you want to, maybe I'll dial in with my phone if you want to loop to the next person.
You got it. We'll see you in a second.
I'll do that. All right.
There was a very fun, ladies and gentlemen, inadvertent case in point about how this simply cannot and should not go on forever as it is. But we'll go from there. Well, in that case, I want to turn to Melissa because it was going to be more fun to have Ben go first here and then have Melissa because, rarely have they ever been on the same panel together. And I've never had a chance to moderate them together because, as I said, they're two of the smartest people I know about this. And they rarely see eye to eye. So I was looking forward to having that. But Melissa, you get to launch the first salvo against Ben there. I'm curious, the similar take on that. And obviously, I know you and Andy, I think, are more aligned here on on individual agency and choice in this. So I'm curious what you are seeing out of your data, talking to your clients as a consultancy. And then obviously Andy will get a chance to do it as an opening salvo as well. But Melissa, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're in an amazing moment in time. And it is, I think there's really some positives of this virtual moment. One of the things that I think is maybe the most either ironic or inspirational or something in between is that people are reporting that they're having more intimate conversations with each other, that their conversation, their relationships feel more connected, maybe more meaningful. You think about an office environment that has all these visual cues about power. And whether it's who's facing the window or the big table in the conference room, we're always surrounded when we're in these physical spaces with visual information that's telling us who's more important or who's less important. And in this virtual world, we have an opportunity for a real flattening and a real opportunity for interconnectedness that we might not have seen before. We're communicating to each other or between persons in our home environments, in environments that seem more intimate. Some of the things that might have seemed cringeable only a few months or years or days ago, children in the background or dogs barking are now kind of okay. And I think we're seeing our colleagues and our coworkers as people, not just the body or the version that comes to the office. And I think that has long-term impacts on community, interconnectedness. We know that kind of trust building is essential to organizations. So I'm not saying that we can do all teleworking forever, but I certainly think that the 1, 2, 3 days a week that we're seeing, especially when we're all equally distributed, is adding a lot to the workplace experience, and I'm for it.
Thank you, Melissa. And sure enough, work from home, someone's pounding on my door. So I'm going to set this up. Andy, I would like you to offer the same here while I go see who's pounding down my door. Pardon me, everyone.
The joys of remote working. I would second a lot of what Melissa had said. Absolutely, this is a great equalizer. Actually, I used to work with somebody who was 100% remote, and she was so excited because she said, everybody's on an equal playing field. I'm no longer the odd person out. So before, when you did have those remote people, they seemed to be the redheaded stepchild that nobody really thought about unless you had a really good moderator. And now everybody's in that boat. And, you know, moving forward, I think it's a really good lesson for all of us in the behaviors that we can welcome back, Greg, the behaviors that we can have as we move forward. The other thing that we're seeing huge concerns about are onboarding. We have social dynamics and networks of how we related to each other over many years. However, if you have somebody brand new to the organization, they have none of that history and relationship building established. And so that's a real open spot right now for a lot of development. There's some strategies and ways of taking care of it, but that's definitely a huge need of trying to bring people on board.
Thank you, Andy. That I would say, and that gets me as a way, since Ben, I think you caught most of this, but to me, this gets sort of like the two of you have already laid out some of the heart of the issues here, which to me relates to what I assume is the audience of this, who are very interested in what occupiers will do and interested in organizations occupying physical spaces. We're already starting to see, right, like the fissures start to go through organizations here where they're having difficulty bringing people into their culture. And Melissa, I want to come back to in a bit about that sort of intimacy. Yeah, we're seeing all sorts of people create and forge and strengthen connections that go outside the traditional org, which I think is going to have interesting implications for culture going forward and what organizations even are, which we can debate and discuss. But I want to go back to Ben's point, because I think by doing this in reverse order, it's actually worked out well for what the data points that Ben has as well, where they're seeing this from an organizational perspective. They're starting to see, yeah, exactly these kinds of issues in strong versus weak ties. So, black screen Ben, let's hear it again, please. Take it from the top.
There we go. Yes, apologies for that. So, you know, I mean, I guess I you know, really, and you know, just to sort of echo what some of the other folks, you know, were saying, I don't think I think the points are extremely valid. At the same time, when we look at the behavioral data of how people are actually working right now, it really does seem that globally and across pretty much every company, at least that we looked at this point, there is, again, just really this increasing investment in people that you need to work with. You are communicating, you're setting aside more time for formal meetings, you're emailing more, you're chatting more with people that you, even pre-pandemic, spent essentially the equivalent of an hour or more one-on-one with a week, right? That's gone up very significantly by over 60%, that kind of communication. At the same time, when you look at these weaker ties, people that you spend 15 minutes or less with on an average week, that has fallen off a cliff. And I think what's interesting there is that those connections are not really useful for near-term work, in that these are not people who are critical for you doing your job right now. But they're people that are outside of your normal social group. They're people from whom you get new ideas. They're people that, again, if you look at milestone attainment, if you look at even, you know, studies on innovation or creativity, those are the most important type of ties for those sort of things. And so really the concern that I have, and I think Melissa made a bunch of great points, which I actually really agree with by and large, in that there is, you know, the potential for really an equality of remote work to, you know, bring people to a similar level, to make it such that people can technologically, you know, communicate more with a more diverse group of people. It just appears that what's happening, at least so far, is a lot less of that. And it's a lot more of just ossifying some of the networks that we previously had. Again, it's not to say there aren't, you know, maybe some, you know, in some cases, companies that have done a lot better. I haven't seen that yet in the data. And I do think there is that opportunity, to Melissa's point, but it seems like that at least what most companies are doing so far really hasn't achieved that, as in more focused on, and what most people are doing is focusing on preserving near-term productivity at the expense of probably the long-term health of organizations.
Well, two points there. One, Ben, it's been suggested that now that you have a separate, reliable audio stream, you should try to turn your video back on. And if you go pixelated on us, it won't matter as much as long as we have good audio.
All right, will do.
And the second one is, you started to mention this before when you were breaking up a bit too. I mean, one of the interesting things is you seem to have, you know, through whatever circumstances, you know, a strong base of clients in Japan and Korea, and you're mentioning some of your Korean clients. What are you seeing in the East Asian Rim from their perspectives on this? Because I read a stat recently that, like, Japanese firms, you know, were reluctant to take up the remote work, and many of them are already turning away from it or dialing back those programs, and they're going back to face-to-face work. So is there anything we can particularly learn? I mean, obviously cultural context is important, I see the inside of your house. There you are. Cultural context is important, but what are the useful lessons from basically Tokyo and Seoul right now? What can New York learn from that?
Yeah, it is really interesting. So we're looking at, because we do have data coming in from, at this point, almost every country in the world. We actually have decent coverage of especially Japan, but also in some places like China and Korea. Japan is sort of an oddball, and so they've been a lot, I just had a call with them with one of our customers here last night, and they've been a lot slower, in general, to adopt remote work or even flexible work as a strategy. It's like you would come into the office every day and you'll be there for 12 hours, and that's just how things work, which I think probably most of us here can understand some of the issues with that. However, there has been a shift towards at least enabling people to work remotely. And honestly, a lot of that at first was just technological. Like literally you could not work outside of the office because you could only access email from a company IP address. Like literally these are things that still today happen there, right? And so I do think there is a pretty healthy change going on there where that now this is an option. And I don't think that's going to change. And I think that if I talk to our customers, what they are seeing and what we're seeing in the data is people, a day a week or so working from home, which again, I think in the US seems like, hey, that seems like pre-pandemic type stuff, but it's hard to overstate just how radical that is, at least in Japan. But again, in a similar way, in terms of the effects that we're seeing for our customers, in East Asia that have had a number of folks working from home for a time, we don't see anything different in the data in terms of how their networks have shifted. Like they shifted to be much more focused on strong ties, much less focused on weak ties. If people get back to the office, then weak ties are reactivated, right? And so why is this? And folks brought this up. It's that I can bump into someone in the hallway, I can have a conversation with you, or I just remember that I should, hey, we should set up a call. And the tools we have today virtually just appear to be not very good at doing that. And again, I'm not saying it's not possible. And I think that there are cultural tools that can be used and could be developed, especially as more and more, as everyone's working remote. But I haven't found, we haven't seen in the data, and we just had a piece in HBR last week where also with some academics who did a number of interviews and surveys, sort of just similar results came out from that, which just makes me feel more confident about the results that, some companies have done different initiatives to try to, virtual happy hours, and I'm sure a lot of us have participated in different sort of events. And what we see in the data, but also just what came out in the qualitative surveys, was that people have to keep changing things up right now. In that if you find something that works even for a period of a couple weeks, that after a couple weeks it doesn't work anymore. And we see that in the data as well, that sometimes you'll see after like a virtual happy hour, people are more likely to email someone or chat with someone who also participated. And that affect degrades over time. And so I do think that's just, I think constant evolution is a good thing, but I'll let you.
But burnout of that, or the constant burning out of tactics and tips and organizations and other thing. At this point, we'll start opening up here. I mean, I have some ongoing questions here, but and Andy and Melissa, I guess as a starter point, I'd be curious to see if you'd like to rebut that in the sense of, is it impossible to do this remote work? Again, I think our audience here is privileged towards the idea that they would love it if every occupier went back and occupied as much space, if not more, in those Manhattan buildings as they do now.
There's
Although
no
I don't think
real estate people on the call, Greg.
I know, but I remember keeping the home crowd sympathies in mind here. But I want to get back to, again, from an organizational perspective on this, because I feel like this is the missing part of the conversation, which is, there are these changes happening to orgs that people are missing right now or coming up with this. And I'm curious, I don't know, maybe another question to ask here too is based on what Andy, you and Melissa are seeing in this, is how would you speculate what's going to happen to corporations over the next, let's say to the end of the year, effectively H2 of the year, Q3 and 4, in terms of organizational effectiveness, attrition, and whatnot? Because I partly suspect, and this is my own pure speculation here, I think this is how it goes, is if corporations, if occupiers really get into the habit of having pure work from home, then they're going to start losing track of who they are organizationally. Employees will drift away from the corporate culture, and you'll see organizations increasingly turn to gig work platforms like Upwork and Workmarket and start basically turning that transactional, that they'll lose track of their own cultures and become more of that. And I don't know, that's my own theory. I'd be curious to see if you have data, because I don't. But
Well,
I don't know.
Greg,
Please,
if I
go
could speak
ahead.
to that, you know, Yahoo had that huge remote work from home forever, and the reason why they brought everyone back into the office was to create the culture. So the purpose of place is really about how do you bring an organization together and create identity to that. And my personal opinion is that remote work is here to stay for a certain proportion, but it's not exclusively remote work. It's working from remote part of the time. I think CoreNet did a study on this, survey of their own participants, and they said that 70% of or roughly 79%, 69, 70% of the people expect to work remote moving forward. However, is it coming into the office once a week? But that also is a question about, and this is a wait and see kind of thing because we don't know yet. Are people going to be nearshoring, offshoring? How is that going to work? You know, is it Denver? Is it Delaware? Or is it Delhi? People don't know that answer yet, and that's something that's going to bear out with time. So I would say that short term, most offices are looking at trying to bring a certain population back. I don't think anything north of 50% at most by the end of the year, from what I've seen. That's the most extreme I've seen. And until we have a virus solution, whether that be herd immunity or whether that be a vaccine, it's really a crapshoot. Melissa?
Yeah. Yeah, Melissa, I say you seem to be pushing back on this idea, so I'm curious your thoughts too. And I should note that Melissa and I worked on a CoreNet project as part of the hackathon here on imagining how can organizations remote work. So you know, I defer to Melissa as our team leader of that team 12.
Yeah, no, I was maybe going to call you out a little bit, Greg, because we coined this term, the
cloud commuting,
cloud commuter.
Yeah.
And you know, I think it's important that you know, first of all, we can't unsee this teleworking experience. Our data show that people say that they before this moment they worked outside of the office an average of 1.5 to 2 days a week. Maybe that was business travel, a little bit of personal time, you know, short Fridays, etc. And going forward post-COVID, so after we're back into accessible offices at typical occupancy, they're predicting that they would like to work an average of 2.5 to 3 days a week in a telework configuration. So a few things that I think, or a telework, or you know, virtual travel, et cetera, outside of the office. I think there's a few interesting things with that point. One, that 1.8 days out of the office is very consistent with what we see as a utilization rate of roughly just under 50% occupancy. And so even though that's maybe not a number that corporates track, it's what people self-report when they're not answering a survey associated with their company. And then secondly, that really pushes us over the 50% line to people being in the office less than half of their workday, and I think, or their work week. And I think that that's really significant because it means that if we don't plan offices in a flexible work environment, activity based work environment, social and flexible way, if we don't plan it for people first and desks later, that we're just going to have offices that look not much different than they look right this minute, which is just empty spaces full of furniture and not built or designed for people. So I really think that, and maybe some other factors there, millennials often did not have an opportunity to have telework as an option because they were the younger cohort. There was a perception they needed to be trained, et cetera. So that whole group of people who maybe are on the verge of having kids, maybe can't necessarily afford to live in some of the communities that they're in now as singletons. That I think that their exposure to this model and their experience with this model is also going to play a long-term influential difference. So I really think that there's so many things, and obviously that's why it's so exciting to talk about. Happening simultaneously. But I also wanted to go back to Ben's point of ossification, and as a great word, by the way, we don't want to get stuck in this bad way. And I think one of the other things that we've seen in our data is change over time. everything from people's perception of what's the most urgent thing in the office to whether teleworking was not. And I think that change over time is something we're also going to see. And so while we're all in the maybe early stages of COVID right now, feeling stressed about our jobs, making sure that we want to reinforce those basic social networks, maybe not focused on bringing in the next cohort of our organization, yes, we're building up those strong ties, we're making them stronger, we're maybe being you know, almost exclusive in the ways that we're behaving as individuals. But we can all choose to behave differently. We can have different structures and different models, whether it is that virtual happy hour, keeping the chat function on, having office hours, right? If you're a leader, why not just open your door and say, pop by, here's the Zoom link, come in anytime. And I just don't think that we've learned to operate in a way that enables those micro interactions in our virtual worlds yet. And I think that's an absence of creativity on our part as leaders, managers, and coworkers. And now more than ever, it's not the technology that's letting us down. You know, Greg, I know you were involved in those 20 years ago flexible work environment projects around the world that blew up because tech wasn't there. Tech is there. And then I put it in the chat function, but my other question back to Ben would be around if we see any variation in the weak ties, loose ties by demographic or by age. Because one of the things I'd expect to see is leaders and older people maybe already calcified
Stop moderating me, Melissa. That was my next question. And I do want to ask that. I mean, we can start with Ben and we can go from there because that got flagged by us. Like, and it's been interesting. I mean, I agree with the general consensus of all the surveys that are being collected on this, that work from home is much more popular with older workers because, right, we have built up social capital. We have networks. We have weak ties we can strengthen, and younger workers do not have networks of ties. There has been, I guess, you know, our mutual friend Phil Kirshner, who might be here, just floated something around on LinkedIn where he was seeing some surveys where older workers were feeling adrift and feeling disconnected. I don't know, Ben, yeah, have you seen anything in your particular take on this? I can imagine my favorite anecdote, by the way, is that I guess Japanese companies have petitioned Zoom to have the president Zoom window bigger so they can maintain hierarchy on their Zoom calls. Love it, love it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
Maybe not the best idea. Yeah, no, and so a couple things. So we haven't sliced it by demographics, just to be clear. So I don't actually know the results of that. I will say that we have looked at things like office hours and what the impact of those are. It seems to be, again, to be fair in our customer base, which these are very large companies. You know, that we're talking about multinationals. You know, you think all of our customers have at least 5,000 employees globally, and the median is closer to like 30,000. So these are larger, but we haven't seen a significant effect in the long term in terms of those meetings really at least getting things like weak ties to, you know, pre-COVID levels. They're just not there in general. Now, again, and Melissa, to your point, there could be demographic differences. My intuition is that maybe not. Actually, my concern is that for companies that are bringing on new employees, if previously you learned through osmosis or, you know, because you're just sort of learning the ropes early on, and you would see that some folks on another team in an office, hey, maybe they've got some stuff that I can help out on. That visibility could be less in companies that haven't done this. I do think one of the questions here, though, is that like a lot of even the research that you know, that I've relied on in the past, you know, to look at things like the impact of work from home. You know, there's a great meta-analysis from this point 10 years ago that basically it's when you start to get over 2 days a week work from home, you see significant impacts to the networks that people have. But I do wonder how valid that is now. I mean, honestly, in that we've previously, you know, you might have some people some of the time working from home. And so maybe not everyone had that experience, but there's a very weird transformational shared experience that everyone's going through. And so it's very, I am very curious, like we've seen significant network changes. We certainly have. I guess, you know, my question is, Melissa, sort of to your point, over time, will those evolve? Will it mean that, you know, we get to the end of the year and we figured some things out? I am somewhat skeptical, but I could very well be wrong. At the same time, I am wondering that has it at very least changed the equation that where in the past, maybe it was 1 day a week pretty much no difference, and then you start to see significant differences 2 days a week. Has that shifted? Would it maybe be in the future more like you have to get to 4 days a week before it's significant? I think that is, I could very well see that being the case. And I do think that shouldn't be underestimated how big that is, because going in 1 day a week and what sort of that means is just very different. And Melissa, to your point, what that means for the office environment. I mean, I think all these things come into play, and it's hard for me. Again, we've got some data coming in from different parts of the world that are doing far better than the U.S. And Greg, you're probably in one of those places, at least doing better than we are, frankly. But I'd still say right now it's still early for us to have seen, like, we haven't crunched the data from those countries to see, like, specifically looking at like number of work from home days. I think that's something that will, I am curious to look at, but it's probably going to take a number of months before we can say something about that.
I want to hear Andy's thoughts on this question as well, and particularly going back to what you've seen with onboarding, because, like, again, like, I think there's a big cultural impact of organizations, culture of the organization and culture of workers. My favorite anecdote of this, Matt Levine, who writes a daily column for Bloomberg Business Week about sort of the markets, has pointed out that, like, yeah, young iBankers are desperate to go back to the office because they want to learn to be iBankers. They want to learn the culture of iBanking and be like them. Like, summer internships in finance don't mean anything if you're working from home. Like, there's that osmosis of culture that has to happen face to face. It's not about the deal. It's about, I don't know, like,
That's a
putt in the office. Yeah, well, that could be argued. But yeah, I'm curious, Andy, your own thoughts and further research, and like whether there's any sort of sectoral approaches about this too. I mean, everyone assumes the tech companies will be just fine working from home and scattering their workforces. I'm not so sure, obviously, but I'm curious your insights as well.
Well, and I think it also comes down to something of a personality perspective too. Someone had mentioned introverts versus extroverts. I worked with a pseudo-government organization, and their joke was, how do you know you're an extrovert? You know the color of the other person's shoes. And, you know, if you have this very rigid mentality, if you think about technology, and think about it, somebody who's writing code every day versus an architect within the technology organization, their work styles and their personalities are very different, and how they engage with each other. The need to really mentor people, it's a lost opportunity. Some of the solutions that have come out are, do you simply have the open Zoom call all day long with a new employee while you're doing your job every day and while they're doing their job every day? Just almost have to have that back and forth dynamic. And is that a way to engage them when you can't be physically close? Because you really do need some of those mentorship capabilities back and forth. In terms of statistics, I would say that if you look at pre-COVID, the Great Places to Work said that people who could work from home 20% of the time, that was the sweet spot for flexibility and employee engagement. Is that going to move to 40%? Is that going to move to 60% or 80%? I think that some level of in-person dynamic is kind of required in order to have some kind of cultural aspect personally. But again, it's so soon that you really can't say that. You know, you have these one-offs, like, can you look back to when JetBlue took everybody to a virtual call center? And can you have this kind of environments? And that allowed for great enhancement of productivity and on-ramping and scalability, but it allowed people to be more effective in their personal lives. But how did it help them with a professional growth strategy and mentorship and going up the corporate ladder? Those are the stories that you didn't hear about out of those case studies. And I don't know if we have a lot of good data yet to really talk about that on a system-wide solution.
Great, thank you, Andy. I have one last question before I start taking the excellent questions from our audience members, and that is, just put a slight provocation out here. And this came up in my CoreNet work group with Melissa, where we had some execs, we had some workplace pros from Netflix and Salesforce. And of course, Salesforce has been very public in talking about how they're trying to get people back into the office. And one of the difficulties we noted there, and this made me think of Ben at the time in terms of how his org maps networks of employees and how work gets done, is we were trying to figure out, you know, if you're bringing back 20, 30, at most 50% of your workforce into physical space, who comes back into that physical space? Like, you know, we were deciding that it had to be someone who's basically multi-sectoral, multi-purpose, basically cross role within the organization. So those people who span multiple teams, multiple informal networks, even if you map them, they're going to be the ones you're going to put in an environment that they see as unsafe. That strikes me as like you're now creating bottlenecks and recipes for burnout inside of orgs. This is all a long-winded way of asking is, do we really think we can actually have a hybrid work model, or is this going to be mostly cloud work, mostly remote work? until mostly back into the office? Or do we think there's actually a gradient that will happen where, you know, we'll go from 20% smoothly back to 100% occupancy? It strikes me that you really can't run an org and try to actually have 20% of your staff face-to-face and gain any of the benefits of working face-to-face. You're just basically gaining the risks and the brittleness within the org. Ben is nodding, so I will perhaps let him offer first here if he wants to buttress my question.
So, yeah, and this was sort of the thesis of our piece in HBR last week, is that I would, at a high level, I feel like going all remote like we're doing now, or mostly co-located is a good way to go. And I feel like hybrid is honestly mixing, in a lot of cases, the worst of both worlds. However, that being said, there are classes of employees, right? And this is what we see at least in our customers. There are classes of employees who can't really work effectively from home. So that you have a poor internet connection, you have a studio apartment, you don't even have a desk. And so if you're trying to program for 8 hours and it's like actually physically uncomfortable, I mean, I even can see this like even at our own company, like here in Boston, we're doing pretty well. And so, you know, some people, but actually the people going back into the office are literally folks who just like physically have a hard time working from home. And they're only going in occasionally, and we have, you know, occupancy limits. At the same time, there's this question, and this is what our customers are doing, you know, when they're trying to figure out then beyond that group, well, who should go back into the office first, they're looking at which teams have been most impacted in terms of the work patterns, and they're trying to move them back in. But what they're doing, and I think this is different, very different than before, is when they move them back in, they're looking at how is that actually changing how they collaborate. And if it doesn't have an impact, right, if it's not changing their networks, then literally the next week, they're not in the office anymore, right? Because again, there's high risk. Why would you do that? There is also a question that if what is really valuable about an office is the facilitation of more serendipitous interactions, and if people feel unsafe doing that because they've got to be farther apart from people and that makes it unnatural, then I would argue there's a lot less of a reason to go into an office. And so I think that you have to see, it's an unsatisfying answer, but it really does depend on the organization. And I would say that there might be some pockets of groups that will significantly benefit, but it's not like a single person. Again, to your point, Greg, if someone's mentioning to, you know, tying together two groups, if those two groups also aren't in the office, then it's irrelevant to have that one person in. And so you have to draw that boundary somewhere, but that maybe beyond that, it actually is a lot worse to just have some pockets in different places rather than having significant groups of people either remote or co-located.
Thank you. Melissa, do you have anything quickly to add to this before I go to audience questions?
Yeah, I think we should go to audience questions because I don't think this is going to be a debate topic. When we were talking about 20 or 50% of people coming back into the office, that was really a building-driven decision. That's how many people could come back to the office. But when we're talking, and I don't think it's that people aren't coming back because it's not safe. I really think we can make our offices safe. But it requires a level of behavior that isn't why people are coming to the office. So if you need to have a mask on, if you need to stay in your own environment, if you basically can't do the things that are the usual reasons for coming to the office, that what we're seeing is companies that are opening their doors for people who are really uncomfortable at home. Maybe they're in transition between geographies or apartments, or they just really don't have a physical space that they use. And the term that I liked the best was working from home at the office. Because basically your type of communication isn't different because of the constraints on being safe within that environment. You're just physically in the office if you need that, 6x6, 8x8 space.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that one. I have done that myself. All right, I want to go to great audience questions. One that has been flagged for us, which gets to Facebook there. So taking the cloud commute and tying it to these larger things. From Larry Charlip, companies talking about moving to work from home strategy are also talking about paying less, Facebook, for example, so they can have employees in cities where they don't have offices. Ads here, I'm not quite certain I understand this. Employees I talk to would rather relocate and make more money than take a pay cut. Well, I mean, wouldn't we all? Welcome, join me in Montreal. But I would take that question, I would give a provocation on top of that is, I will throw this out there. I think Facebook, if they are serious about this work from home movement, I think this is their AT&T moment where they go from being an innovator to a fat cat monopoly, and they just make money and they enter a period of permanent secular decline as an organization. partly because of this strategy and many other factors. Anyone want to take on this? Do we think what Facebook is doing, this sort of notion of perhaps geographic arbitrage as well, where you can work from wherever you like, but we're going to anchor your pay to the local cost of living? I don't know, anyone agree with me, or anyone think this is something to be emulated perhaps?
I think it's definitely
this
a
has
risk.
happened before. Andy, go ahead.
Andy first.
Oh, I was gonna, it's definitely a risk. I think every organization is looking to save on costs and get more effectiveness. At the same time, the question is, what is the cost for innovation? As you know, innovation is really driven by thinking about new ways of doing things or applying from one area of sector to another to see what kind of lift you can get. True innovation is so unique. So really, I think that it's one of those things that, as you said, very well could be their AT&T moment. Yeah.
I think that the model assumes that there's no human capital differentiation, which we all know is not true. The whole proposition of the benefits of being able to use telework to employ people around the world is that you can get the top 10% or the top 20% in your field category, et cetera, irrespective of geography. So the idea that you would then baseline or benchmark by geography really puts you back into the middle of the road. And so I'm with you, Greg, that it's really a missed opportunity to see what being boundless in geography can offer from a human capital perspective for anything other than call centers and things that really could be done anywhere. But maybe the upside of that is onshoring.
Thank you, Melissa. Ben, you want to complete the dunking on Facebook?
Sure. Yeah, so I mean, I think that, everyone brought up really good points. I think that if a company is making decisions because they're throwing up their hands and they're like, hey, it's just really complicated for us to figure out a real estate strategy moving forward. So what we're going to do is we're not going to have one, and we're just going to save money, right? I feel like you're going to fail. And like Melissa brought this up as well, like there are classes of jobs where they're not going to be that impacted by working remotely, right? But at the same time, the impact of, the pandemic and changing the work, and the changes in work styles that is created is unclear, right? I think we have some thoughts on what that will mean in the future, but any company that says, hey, I think we know, I know what's going to happen over the next 10 years to work styles. Like they're lying. Everyone knows they're lying because no one knows what's going to happen next month. Please don't tell me you know what's going to happen in 10 years. And so I do very much think that, and if you looked at for Facebook, they were like, if you're a high performer, you can work remotely. Well, that's crazy. Like, does me being a high performer mean that that has nothing to do with me? That just means, again, we all know what the implications of that are. Like these people, I trust them. I know they're going to work. These other people, I don't trust them. But of course, what Facebook does is they make an incredibly complex technological product, which is full of dependencies, which is all about collaboration. And so you might be the highest performer out there, but if you only collaborate effectively with people in the office, then your performance and their performance is going to suffer if you work virtually. Conversely, maybe it's the opposite. But again, you don't know unless you actually have a coherent strategy. And I think it's very clear that the Facebooks of the world, I'll dunk on Twitter and Square as well. It's the same thing. It's an abdication of responsibility. And I think that is the big issue for them long term.
Thank you. I was just asked by a reporter in San Francisco yesterday about can tech solve housing issues. I was like, well, big tech is abandoning Silicon Valley. Like they don't want to pay, they don't want to deal with the issues. They'd rather just their employees disperse rather than have to pay them enough to afford homes in the Bay Area. So it could always be worse. I've been informed by the powers be. Steven's asked me to invite people up to ask their questions. So apologies to Larry there that I stepped on him. I'm going to go, Phil Kirshner, turn on your video and audio here. Since we've invoked you, it's like Beetlejuice. If I say your name once more, you'll appear here and do a bio or exorcism of our panel. But Phil, you had a question. There you are. You had a question, restate about this disagreement about who's disadvantaged with this arrangement. So I'll let you expand at length.
Yeah, I just had noticed recently, first through like Leaseman and their studies, that younger workers, and this has been mentioned already today, like are disadvantaged because they need mentoring informally and are still just trying to figure out like what it feels like to work for a given company, whether it's investment banking or technology, and that they're missing out on getting the social capital that a senior, more tenured employee might have. But then an architecture firm recently published a report this week saying that actually, as you go up the ladder to executives, that those executives are feeling less connected in a way. And I don't know how connected they might have started, but that was the first time I'd seen a real disagreement, like who has it worse. So I'm curious if all of you have a view on that from your reports or anecdotally, and there may be different reasons why they're worse, but
Parents, Phil, parents have it worse. Sorry,
parents
Laura.
always have it worse
have
right now,
in that one.
for
at least
sure.
At least at the moment. But I didn't mean to step on my panelists. Anyone?
So I guess it almost raises more questions for me. I'm always insanely curious about this because when I hear executives have this issue, my question is, did the executives previously travel and now are they grounded? And so they need to retool their skills to think about how do I mentor and how do I lead in a digital environment versus a face-to-face environment? That's my first question that really raises for me, because I think that there is also a segment of people who are just more prone to engagement in a face-to-face environment, and maybe people who are boomers or traditionalists might be a little bit more prone that way. What does everyone else think?
Anyone?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just interesting. So if I look at communication data, it doesn't appear that it's interesting that when you slice it by hierarchical level, it doesn't appear like there's significant differences in terms of how different levels of hierarchy are communicating. Again, and Melissa, this gets to one of your points earlier. It's not exactly a proxy for age. That's why I'm just hesitant to say that that's age. It is obviously related. It's correlated. But there wasn't, I was actually surprised. I assumed there was going to be more significant differences there. It is interesting, though, that if again, just think back to some of the survey results of my co-authors out of UT Austin, who surveyed both CEOs, but as well as frontline employees. And what frontline employees were extremely satisfied in general with working from home over time, and they have a weekly survey. You should read the paper. They've got it's super great data, and it's a panel survey. They keep surveying the same people every week. It's super representative, so it's a very, very nice data, and Melissa might have some more as well. But it was striking to me that those frontline folks felt like things were going very well, whereas, again, it was similar, like CEO level folks were really concerned. The concerns, at least, that they brought up in the survey, I think gets to some of what we see in the behavioral data, which was that the executives, at least that they interviewed and surveyed, weren't worried about near-term productivity or performance. They were really worried that the collaborative glue that was holding the organization together was falling apart. And so, Andy, some of this can get to your point in terms of, some of them might not have the skills to do this, but I think it also just illustrates that they are subjectively feeling that, hey, some of these things that just grease the wheels and help our culture continue and help the business continue over time seem to not be happening, and that's stressing me out. Again, there could be arguments if they should do other things, but that does at least appear to be some of the reaction.
I want to move on to the next question here. Dale Schlather, are you there? Do we have Dale on the hotline? I don't know. Give him a second here. I might ask this question for him.
Yeah, I'm here.
Great, Dale. You had a follow-up question about Facebook. Could you follow up on that one?
Yeah, I asked if they're going to work remotely. Why are they rumored to take another, 1 million square feet at Farley Post Office and at the Neiman site? They've already leased 1.5 million feet at 30 30, 50, and 55 Hudson Yards.
Because they support.
And now they're talking about another 1 million feet. So if they're working from home, why would they do that?
Thank you, Dale. Melissa.
I was just saying it's because they support great architecture in New York City and Penn State and demolished.
Well, slightly less facetiously, I would ask, as maybe a way of broadening that question too, is like, how much do you as panelists, based on your interaction with your clients and based on what you're seeing out there, actually believe the whole cant of like true work from home from ever? Let's say of the Facebook, Twitter, and the Silicon Valley varieties, because anything Twitter says, I immediately discount it, because those are the same jerks who basically got a lucrative tax break from the city of San Francisco to move there, and then became the lead item in every like tech is returning to cities item for decades. And we've already had a discussion here. I mean, Yahoo brought back work from home in part to fire some malcontents who they didn't like over the VPN. IBM ended work from home because they wanted to fire a bunch of older workers who had families settled We know why they did this. That's probably why I got disillusioned with some of these arguments, is because a lot of the companies that privilege face-to-face in cities were lying. They lied. They had other reasons. So
Yeah.
I don't know, Melissa.
Well, I love that point, Greg, because it is very similar to a relocation, right? When you move from Connecticut to Boston and you give a bunch of compensation packages and golden parachutes, et cetera. I think we could consider this jumping back and forth between digital and physical to be almost a version of that relocation that enables a lot of different kinds of decompensation packages, et cetera. Yeah, I think that, I mean, maybe to my point about architecture to Dale, I've got so much to say, but I want to stay on your question. Architecture is still really symbolic, especially the outsides of buildings. And being able to have a flag in a ground in a city is really, I think, very important. And if anything, when we go back into the work environment, those work environments need to be more experiential than ever before. They need to be more destination than ever before. So I'm not saying that, you know, I would say that if these companies continue with these large footprints, I expect that we're going to see a different version of what fills in that large footprint when we see the inside of the box. And that, you know, maybe they're using that space for amenity space for the entire tri-state area, or using it for a new kind of client outreach that we haven't seen yet. So I think that the future is very dynamic and also very blended. I think we're going to see more education, more relationship between corporate and education, more people coming out of school younger, getting maybe more training as part of their corporate experience, more hospitality experience. So as these, I think we might see that those spaces get taken up with something that looks much more multifunctional, multi-sector than, you know, I can't see it filling up with white desks as originally planned.
So a little bit of a follow-up, just, and then I'll mute myself again and go away. Don't you think that really it's all about what Gen Z and the young millennials are going to do? I mean, this whole thing, and the reason that Facebook is taking 2.5 million feet in New York and Google has grown so much and Amazon has to do with retaining and attracting talent. So I think the part, and I think Greg, you kind of touched on this, we don't know, or actually I think it was Ben, we don't know for sure. We have no idea. Anybody that says they know is lying. So isn't that really the driver of all of it? What do they want to do, and what really Gen Z is going to drive this bus?
I want to hear from Andy on this in just a sec. I just want to point out, I did an ethnographic project a few years ago for a big automaker on the future of work, and it was limited to New York, so I took them on a tour of all the cool workspaces, including like WeWork headquarters, and literally every single person we visited, no matter the sector, said, we're competing for talent with Facebook and Google. I'm like, that's really fascinating and weird. But Andy, your thoughts on this?
Well, you know, I have more speculation and questions than I have thoughts, because if you listen to Scott Galloway, you know, he says that right now you're really separating the wheat from the chaff right now. The strong companies with strong financials are really going to grow in this economy, and the companies with weak financials are going to come back, or going to reduce. And if that's the case, Facebook having the financial balance sheet that they have and the market share that they have, are they positioning themselves for either A, an acquisition, B, trying to future-proof the needs for real estate in the New York market? Because when we talk about attraction retention, so Dale, I don't have a solid answer for you. I have a lot more questions, because it just makes me wonder how they're positioning that and how that's going to solve a business need for them.
And I just want to say, with 3 young teenagers in the house, that we can really not predict, because this last 6 months has changed their lives, and they are not going to be the same people. I expect the same work habits in 5 or 10 years as they would have before the last 3 months, and we've probably got another 18 months to go. So we really can't predict it, because it's so dynamic that this is a seminal moment in the Gen Z lifespan. And so I think that even more thoughtfulness to go into that right now.
Yes, it cannot be overstated how much we have, to what an unknown extent, we have damaged our children collectively here. So thank you, Melissa, for that very cheerful point. We have 3 minutes left, so we have time for one more question. If Suzanne Camarota is here, come on down. Come on, it's like feel like Price is Right. Come on down to the special showcase.
How exciting.
Suzanne, there you are.
I've always wanted to be on The Price is Right.
Well, here's your chance. So you had a question about, bringing us back like full circle here about, can innovation happen remotely? So I was wondering if you could ask that.
Yeah, I just, the conversations that I've been a part of in different webinars and different conferences, kind of stem a lot around that. Innovation is a spontaneous thing. It happens when it's unplanned, and it really struggles to happen in a, hey, let's have a Zoom meeting at 6 o'clock today or 5 o'clock today and discuss some innovation ideas. That spontaneity is really what we miss with not being in the office. And do you guys have an opinion or thought on, how do you foster that type of innovation from a work from home or a remote environment?
Thank you, Suzanne. I want to hear rapid responses first from Ben and Melissa, or Melissa then Ben, because Melissa said earlier, like, we have the tech to do this. Like, she believes we have the tools. I think Ben is skeptical of the stance that we can do online innovation, or at least as well as we can in person. So Melissa, you go first.
Have fun, give people ownership, know the objectives, and be experimental. I'd also say that work environments tend to be advantaged for extroverts and disadvantaged to introverts, our office environments. Give the introverts a way of facilitating that conversation. They are chock full of ideas, and we don't need to go to the office to have amazing ideas.
Thank you, Ben.
All right, and so maybe I'll just wrap. Yeah, so I do think that there are, by planning, again, like Melissa was saying, like experimental things, rapidly changing things, randomly pairing up people for things like virtual lunches or coffees. Like, that's an easy thing to do that doesn't get old also. That's one of the things that doesn't get old. And it does, again, in the data, it's not extensively used enough in our customers for us to say something about it. But I feel like things like that can make a difference in the near term. My intuition is that they won't, they're more of a supplement rather than a replacement for what happens in the office. But I do think more things like that could be helpful.
Excellent. Well, with that, I would like to thank my 3 panelists. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Ben. Round of virtual applause. This has been fun. As fun as I hoped it would be, for sure. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to our hosts.
Thank you very much, Greg. Just to mirror what you just said, thank you to everyone. Thank you to the audience and the participation in the chat and the Q&A. I suppose everyone takes different things out of this. I definitely took out the Ben of changing things up, because it talks to the innovation that we just spoke about, and it is a bit like Groundhog Day at the moment. So with that, I will hand over to Tommy, just with any final thoughts and any upcoming events. Thanks.
You're muted, Tommy. Tommy, sorry, you got to start at the top.
Okay, I'm just demonstrating the hazards of working remotely. Thanks again. Just to be short, the next event is another similar one, but it's the Eastern Regional. So we're going to have representation from all the chapters. I think there's 7 in total from North America, from New York, New Jersey, Mid-Atlantic, New England, Philly, and Connecticut. So it should be great. It's a similar discussion, and that will be next Wednesday. Multiple events on the calendar. So thanks, everybody. And this has been recorded. This will be distributed to everybody on the call in case you missed anything. So thanks again to our panelists. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.